So too many leaders are bleeding. And this is an idea that's come up in 3 very different conversations today. However, I think they have the same core, this idea where I call it bleeding, where I lose sense of where I begin and end and where I engage with the world around me. And what that looks like is I practice overload. I don't know when to say yes or no, or rather stop too much. And I just take on and I take on and I take on. And perhaps as an entrepreneur or an agency leader, that looks like scope creep in project management. It's like there's just no boundaries. But it's not that other people don't respect your boundaries. It's that you're unable as leader of self and as leader in a team or as a program manager, team leader, you're unable to establish and hold fast to the boundaries. It's like you can't say no. It's just like you bleed out, just giving your time, and it's before you know it, there's so much that you're doing. Your thoughts are going in so many different areas, your skills and talents are going in so many different places that you feel thin and spread out, and we can call that overload. And when we're overloaded, it's like you're so busy doing so many different things that you can't really do any one of them any really good. And that means poor quality work. That can also mean that you feel bad, you feel guilty that you're not doing what you think you could or should. So it's like a double whammy. It's like a coin with 2 sides. The one is like, man, I can do better. And that you allow that to say something about yourself. But then you also allow that to say something about how you're showing up externally. So both internally and externally. And this creates strain. This creates an emotional tension. And now you add that emotional tension to this already unspread thin, this overload, and you add that to, I'm too busy. And you can't say no. And this is what I call bleeding. And the core to this practice of bleeding, of you just can't say no, is because there's a poor sense of self-esteem, but particularly your inner authority, your personal power. You don't have this ego strength to say, this is me, this is that, this is where I begin and end, that's where that begins and ends, and I just need to practice some self-care, some self-love, some self-respect, and just to bring myself to myself and be able to say no. Too many leaders just don't know how to do this because they're practicing personalizing. Well, I know how that feels. I used to personalize just about everything. So to say no to something felt as if I was saying no to someone. And if I was saying no to someone, it would mean I gave it the meaning that they would be rejected by me, and my need to belong and my need to connect and my need to add value and do good work, that was so high that I was unable to practice that no, to practice that boundary, because I didn't have this ego strength. The activated leader is able to make that separation of self, to understand this emotional experience I'm having because of a physical experience. So when I'm doing too much, or I'm practicing scope creep, or I don't have the internal strength, the fortitude to stand my ground, to be able to say no without fear of a consequence, or personalizing the fear of that consequence. When I'm able to see my emotion innocently, objectively, without judgment, and just go, I can do that, or I can't do that, or hang on, we're now practicing scope creep. Can we re-engage? Can we reconnect? Or in another sense, as a leader, an organization, or perhaps you're an executive, a manager, team lead, and you're seeing stuff that's been delegated, but people are not taking responsibility. People are not responding. They're not able to respond to what they're accountable for. And this bleeding, this where it's just not getting done. It's a similar scenario. So there's 2 sides to this coin. The other side is, if I'm bleeding out really well, I can also bleed in. I can also not only do overload, but I can do over responsibility. I can take on more than I really should, or more than what's healthy for me. Perhaps you've heard the the phrase of an empath. People will talk about this, no, but I'm an empath. I feel for other people. When you know your personal powers to think and to feel, you know that you can't think for someone else and you can't feel for someone else. You can feel, you can practice an emotion towards someone else, but then you're bleeding in. Then you're taking on something, an idea or an emotion that isn't really yours, but you're adopting it and you're adapting it to your system, you're adding it to your system, and you're adding over responsible to already overloaded. And then it's not a surprise that you practice overwhelm. So I wonder if you're bleeding, and how in your different areas of life it's this conversation, and it makes sense to me in a time where everything's under strain, and post-COVID and into this new world and this future, we're all wondering how we can show up more effectively to get more, maximize the operational efficiency and effectiveness, and to do more with less, and be rewarded more from less, not being lazy, but just to maximize things. But we can lose sense of ourselves, and as we bleed, so we become less effective and we lose sense of ourselves. But it doesn't have to be that way.